What happens when America's sharpest late-night host comes face to face with Hollywood royalty known for controversial exits? What unfolds next is something few viewers expected. When Stephen Colbert went head-to-head with Meghan Markle, what began as a seemingly friendly interview quickly spiraled into one of the most explosive late-night confrontations of the year. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because what happened next stunned audiences everywhere. Last night's episode of The Late Show was supposed to be just another celebrity appearance. Instead, viewers witnessed a full-blown meltdown that sent social media into a frenzy within minutes. The Duchess of Sussex walked onto the stage wearing her signature smile. But by the time the cameras stopped rolling, tears were streaming down her face as she stormed off set in what many are already calling one of the most dramatic exits in late-night television history. The tension was palpable from the moment Meghan settled into the guest chair. Colbert, known for his razor-sharp wit and uncanny ability to slice through celebrity facades, seemed unusually focused as he shuffled his index cards. The audience, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface, applauded enthusiastically as the familiar theme music faded and the red recording light illuminated the studio. Well, Colbert began, flashing the trademark smirk that has made him both beloved and feared. "We have royalty in the house tonight, folks. Please welcome Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, humanitarian, actress, and someone who certainly knows how to make headlines." The applause was generous, but those paying close attention might have noticed the subtle edge in Colbert's voice, a quiet warning of what was to come. Meghan, dressed in an elegant navy blazer and projecting the image of a polished public figure, smiled graciously and waved to the crowd. "Thank you for having me, Stephen. It's wonderful to be here." Her voice was smooth and controlled, the product of extensive media training, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she was already on guard. The opening minutes unfolded exactly as expected. Colbert asked about her philanthropic work, her life in California, and her children. Meghan delivered carefully crafted responses, each sounding practiced and deliberate. But longtime Colbert viewers knew this was just the warm-up. The real conversation was still waiting to begin. "So, Meghan," Colbert said, leaning forward slightly as his tone shifted almost imperceptibly, "you've certainly had quite the journey. From Suits to the Palace to Montecito. Some might say you've mastered the art of the dramatic exit. Care to comment?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. The studio audience sensed the shift immediately. Meghan's smile flickered for just a split second before she recovered. "I think that's a rather unfair characterization, Stephen. Every decision I've made has been about protecting my family and staying true to my values." Her voice remained steady, but her hands clasped tightly in her lap betrayed her composure. "Values?" Colbert repeated, slowly nodding. "Right, values like privacy. A word you've used quite often in interviews and court documents. And yet, here you are, after Oprah, after the Netflix series, after the podcast. I'm starting to think your definition of privacy might be a little different from Webster's." The audience fell completely silent, aware they were witnessing something unprecedented. "Stephen, I think you're misunderstanding the situation," Meghan replied, her media-trained calm beginning to show the first visible cracks. "There's a difference between sharing our truth and having lies spread about us in the press." "Our truth?" Colbert echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Interesting phrase. I've always been partial to the truth myself. But I suppose when there are multiple versions of events, you have to clarify which truth you mean." The words landed with surgical precision, each syllable calculated for maximum impact. Meghan straightened in her chair, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal the steel beneath. "I'm not sure what you're implying, but I've been nothing but honest about my experiences." "Honest," Colbert mused, tapping his pen against the desk. "Like telling Oprah you weren't prepared for royal life, despite having access to centuries of protocol and an entire staff assigned to prepare you. Or claiming you weren't allowed to leave the palace when there are countless photos of you attending events and outings." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop instantly. Meghan's jaw tightened, and for the first time since sitting down, she looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Those are oversimplifications of very complex situations," she said. "The reality of what we experienced was far more nuanced than what could be captured in a single interview." "Nuanced?" Colbert repeated, savoring the word. "You know what's interesting about nuance? It's often used to explain away contradictions, like leaving the royal family citing racism and lack of support, while your own father claims you cut him off completely. Or saying Catherine made you cry, then later saying it was the other way around, or calling the institution cold and unwelcoming, yet somehow securing a multi-million-dollar Netflix deal built entirely on royal connections. The audience leaned forward in their seats, fully captivated. This was no longer playful late-night banter. This was raw, personal, and intense. "Stephen," Meghan said sharply, "you're taking isolated incidents and weaving them into a narrative that simply isn't accurate. The challenges we faced were real, and the decision to step back was not made lightly." "Step back," Colbert repeated with a bitter laugh. "That's another interesting euphemism. Most people would call it quitting. But I suppose when you're worth hundreds of millions and have production deals lined up, it's easier to frame it as stepping back rather than walking away when things got tough." The confrontation escalated rapidly. Everyone in the studio could feel it. Meghan's hands gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles turning white with tension. "You have no idea what it was like," she said, her voice rising. "The constant scrutiny, the lies, the attacks on my character. No one should have to endure that. No one should have to live under constant scrutiny," Meghan said. Colbert shot back immediately. "You married into the most famous family in the world. What exactly did you think was going to happen? That the press would ignore you? That there wouldn't be intense interest in every aspect of your life? Complaining about that is like jumping into a swimming pool and then being upset that you got wet." The studio was now thick with tension. The cameras captured every micro-expression, every subtle shift in body language. What had begun as a celebrity interview was rapidly transforming into something far more confrontational, far more personal, and far more explosive than anyone had anticipated. Meghan's carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble, and Colbert showed no signs of backing down. The real fireworks were only just beginning, and everyone in the studio knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years. The question was no longer whether this would end badly, it was how badly. The silence that followed was deafening. Colbert leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Meghan's face as she struggled to maintain her composure. The audience held its collective breath, sensing they were on the brink of something unprecedented in late-night television history. "Let me ask you something else," Colbert continued, his voice dropping into a more intimate, almost conversational tone, one that somehow made his words even sharper. "You've spoken extensively about mental health, about the importance of therapy and getting help. Admirable, really. But here's what I find curious. You've also admitted to having suicidal thoughts while pregnant." "Correct." Meghan's face went pale. "Stephen, that's extremely personal." "Personal, yes," Colbert replied smoothly, "but also public, since you chose to share it with Oprah and tens of millions of viewers worldwide." He didn't pause. "My question is this: if you were truly in such a dark place, experiencing thoughts of self-harm, why didn't you seek help? You had access to the best medical care in the world, unlimited resources, yet you claimed the institution prevented you from getting treatment. Does that really make sense to anyone?" The question hung in the air like a physical weight. Meghan's hands began to tremble, her breathing growing shallow. "You're oversimplifying a very complex situation," she managed, her voice noticeably shakier than before. "Am I?" Colbert pressed. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you had two choices: get the help you needed, or use your suffering as ammunition for a future tell-all interview. And we all know which path you chose." A shockwave rippled through the studio. Several audience members gasped audibly, while crew members exchanged uneasy glances that spoke volumes about the unprecedented nature of what they were witnessing. Meghan's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "How dare you suggest I would exploit my own mental health struggles for publicity? You have no idea what it's like to feel trapped, to feel like you have nowhere to turn." "Trapped?" Colbert's voice rose slightly. "You were living in a palace, Meghan. A literal palace with servants, security, and more money than most people will see in 10 lifetimes. If that's your definition of trapped, then we need to have a conversation about perspective. Money doesn't solve everything." Meghan shot back, her voice now edged with desperation. "You can't buy happiness. You can't buy peace of mind. And you certainly can't buy protection from an institution that wants to destroy you." "Destroy you?" Colbert laughed, but there was no humor in it. They made you a duchess. They gave you a platform to champion causes you care about. They welcomed you into one of the most exclusive families on the planet. If that's their idea of destruction, sign me up. The exchange grew increasingly heated. Meghan was visibly struggling to maintain her composure. Her makeup couldn't hide the flush creeping up her neck, and her hands were now openly shaking. "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "The constant criticism, the control over every aspect of our lives. The way they abandoned us when we needed support the most. Controlled every aspect of your lives." Colbert repeated incredulously. "You negotiated a multi-million-dollar Netflix deal while still working royals. You launched a podcast, you gave unauthorized interviews, you sued multiple newspapers. That doesn't sound like someone whose life was being controlled." "We were fighting for our survival," Meghan insisted, tears welling in her eyes. "Everything we did was to protect our family, to protect our son from the same treatment Harry endured growing up." "Your son," Colbert said, his tone sharpening further. "Let's talk about Archie. You've claimed there were conversations about how dark his skin might be, concerns about his title, serious allegations. But here's what I find interesting, you've never actually named who made those comments. You allowed the entire royal family to sit under a cloud of suspicion rather than identifying a specific individual. Why is that?" Meghan's breathing became labored. "We felt it wouldn't be right to." "Wouldn't be right," Colbert interrupted. "You were comfortable implying an entire institution was racist. Comfortable damaging the reputation of an entire family. But you draw the line at naming names. That's awfully convenient, don't you think?" The studio fell completely silent, broken only by the hum of the cameras and the sound of Meghan's increasingly distressed breathing. Crew members looked visibly uncomfortable, some glancing toward the exits as if expecting someone to call cut at any second. "You're twisting everything," Meghan said, her voice now openly shaking. "You're taking our words out of context," Meghan said through tears. "You're making us sound like villains when we were the ones being victimized." "Victimized," Colbert repeated slowly. "By a family that gave you everything you could possibly want. By an institution that elevated you from a cable television actress to global royalty. By a country that initially welcomed you with open arms. If that's victimization, then I think we need to redefine the word." Meghan was now openly crying, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to form coherent responses. "We lost everything," she whispered. "Our security, our family relationships, our sense of belonging. We gave up everything for love and they punished us for it." "You gave up everything for love," Colbert replied, his tone openly mocking. "No, you gave up a life of service for a life of celebrity. You traded duty for dollars, obligation for opportunity. Don't dress it up as some grand romantic sacrifice when everyone can see what really happened." The confrontation reached a fever pitch. Neither of them showed any sign of backing down. Meghan was visibly distraught, her carefully constructed public persona completely shattered, while Colbert pressed forward with the ruthless efficiency of a seasoned prosecutor. "I can't do this anymore," Meghan said, her voice barely audible above her sobs. "This is exactly the kind of attack we were trying to escape." "Attack?" Colbert's eyebrows shot up. "I'm asking you questions. Questions any reasonable person would ask given the contradictions in your story. If you consider that an attack, then maybe the problem isn't the questions. Maybe it's the answers." The tension in the studio was at a breaking point. Everyone present could sense that something explosive was about to happen. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of what was quickly becoming one of the most dramatic confrontations in late-night television history. The question was no longer whether this would end badly, but whether anyone would be able to pick up the pieces afterward. Colbert wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his voice sharpening as he prepared to deliver what felt like the final blow. "You know what I think, Meghan. I think you're a master manipulator who saw an opportunity and took it. You married into the most famous family in the world, realized it wasn't the fairy tale you imagined, and decided to burn it all down on your way out." Meghan's sobs intensified, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "That's not true," she choked out. "We tried to make it work. We tried to serve. We tried to do our duty. They made it impossible. They made it impossible." Colbert shot back, his voice rising to meet her emotion. "Or did you make it impossible because you couldn't handle not being the center of attention? You went from being a supporting actress on a cable show to one of the most famous women in the world, And somehow, even that wasn't enough. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, many visibly uncomfortable with the intensity unfolding before them. Several crew members had stopped what they were doing, watching with expressions that mixed fascination and disbelief. "You don't know what you're talking about." Meghan managed through tears, her voice growing increasingly desperate. "The pressure, the scrutiny, the lies they told about us. No one should have to endure that. The lies they told." Colbert let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "What about the lies you told? Claiming you didn't know who Harry was when you met him. Pretending you weren't familiar with the royal family despite photos of you as a teenager surrounded by Diana memorabilia. And what about the convenient timing of every revelation, every interview, every carefully orchestrated media appearance?" Meghan collapsed inward, covering her face with her hands as she openly sobbed. I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "This is exactly the kind of cruelty we were trying to escape." "Cruelty?" Colbert replied, his voice now openly contemptuous. "I'm asking you to explain your actions. I'm asking you to account for the contradictions in your story. If that's cruelty, then maybe the problem isn't the questions. Maybe the problem is that you can't handle being held accountable for your choices." The confrontation had reached an intensity no one in the studio had ever witnessed. Meghan was breaking down completely, her carefully crafted public image obliterated under relentless questioning. Yet Colbert showed no signs of backing off, his journalist instincts fully engaged. "Here's what I think really happened," he continued, his voice cutting through her sobs like a blade. "You believed you could use the royal family as a stepping stone to even greater fame and fortune. When that didn't work the way you planned, you played the victim and cashed in on your grievances. Every interview, every revelation, every tear, all carefully calculated to maximize your earning potential while destroying the people who welcomed you into their family." "Stop," Meghan pleaded weakly. "Please just stop. Stop." Colbert raised an eyebrow. "You had no problem airing your grievances on Oprah. No problem making serious allegations about racism and mental health. No problem destroying relationships and reputations. But the moment someone asks you to explain yourself, suddenly you want it to stop." Meghan tried to compose herself, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. But the damage was already done. Her makeup was ruined, her composure shattered, and her credibility hanging by a thread. "You're being deliberately cruel," Meghan said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Cruel?" Colbert replied incredulously. "I'm being thorough. I'm being the kind of journalist that apparently doesn't exist anymore. Someone who asks hard questions instead of letting celebrities spin narratives without challenge." "I won't sit here and be attacked like this," Meghan said, trying to stand. Her legs shook beneath her, and she stumbled slightly. "Attacked?" Colbert rose to his feet as well, his voice rising to meet her movement. "You came on my show, Meghan. You chose to put yourself in this position. You chose to make these claims, to tell these stories, to present yourself as a victim. Don't act surprised when someone finally calls you out on it." "I'm done," Meghan said, her voice cracking. "I'm done with this interview. I'm done with these attacks. And I'm done with people like you who think they can tear me down for entertainment." "Entertainment?" Colbert let out a harsh laugh. "This isn't entertainment. This is accountability. This is what happens when you make serious allegations against one of the world's most respected institutions, and then can't back them up with facts." Meghan moved toward the edge of the interview area, her hands shaking as she fumbled with her microphone. "I came here in good faith," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I came to talk about my work, my family, my life, and instead you've turned this into character assassination." "Good faith," Colbert called after her as she stepped away. "You've been playing fast and loose with the truth for years, Meghan. Don't talk to me about good faith when you've built your entire post-royal career on selective storytelling and convenient omissions." "I don't have to listen to this," Meghan said through tears as she struggled to remove her microphone. "I don't have to sit here and be humiliated on national television." "Humiliated?" Colbert shot back relentlessly. "You humiliated yourself the moment you chose your personal brand over family relationships. When you chose publicity over privacy, drama over duty, and victimhood over accountability." The studio descended into chaos. Crew members moved frantically, unsure whether to intervene or keep filming. The audience sat in stunned silence, watching one of the most famous women in the world unravel before their eyes. "Quit crying," Colbert said, his voice slicing through the commotion. You wanted to play in the big leagues, Meghan. You wanted to be taken seriously as a public figure. This is what that looks like. This is what happens when you make serious allegations and can't defend them when challenged. The words struck her like a physical blow. Meghan stopped struggling with the microphone and looked directly at Colbert, her eyes filled with hurt, anger, and devastation. You're a terrible person, she whispered. Maybe. Colbert replied calmly. But at least I'm honest about it. Can you say the same? That was the final straw. Meghan ripped the microphone free and threw it to the floor. The sound echoed through the studio as it struck the ground. Without another word, she turned and walked quickly toward the exit, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she fled the scene of what had become a full-scale public relations disaster. The cameras followed her retreat, capturing every second of her dramatic exit as she pushed past crew members and rushed backstage. Her sobs were still audible as she disappeared from view, leaving behind a studio full of stunned witnesses and a host who had just delivered one of the most brutal takedowns in late-night television history. Colbert stood alone behind his desk, watching the chaos unfold. The studio lights felt harsher now, the silence heavier. He had gotten his answers, or at least exposed the absence of them. What was meant to be a friendly interview had turned into a masterclass in journalistic confrontation. As the studio slowly settled and the crew began to process what they had just witnessed, one thing was unmistakably clear. This was a moment that would be dissected, debated, and remembered for years to come. The Duchess of Sussex had entered the studio as a carefully crafted public figure. She left as something else entirely. Who do you think was right in this argument? Comment below.